Coming up, the first joint practice for the Giants and the Lions returns. I don't know, some concerning results. We'll certainly talk about that. The return of one Wan'Dale Robinson much sooner than expected. And ultimately, where should the Giants be looking to rank themselves heading into this season and set the bar high for an offense that we want to shine? Yes, my friends, it's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where we are your hosts over here, Adam Armbrecht, covering the Brooklyn Nets on the Locked On Nets podcast, your New Jersey Devils on the Devils Puck Luck podcast, joined as always by the healthy, the wealthy, the wise, the seasoned generational ticket holder, Mr. Andrew Makowitz. How are we, sir, on a Tuesday?
I'm doing good. I just realized, though, in the intro, it's talking about all the really cool things you're doing, how busy you are, and then it's like the guy that likes watching football, Andy Makowitz. That's me.
Sure.
So it's a stark difference between the two, but I'm really excited, feeling good, Adam.
Is there any, we could always, we could work on it. Like, do you have any hobbies? Have you been macrameing? Have you been, you know what I mean? Are you a big Othello player? There's any number of avenues that we can go to kind of bulk you up a little bit.
Yeah, we got to find out what I'm into that's relevant to the OGP podcast. Like you're like, oh, I podcast for all these different things. I'm into sports. Like let's talk about this offline. We'll figure
Sure.
out a better introduction for myself.
I like the idea that figuring out what Andy enjoys is a group effort. You're going to need to get a whole team together here to determine what this man is into. That being the case, we'll circle up on that aspect of it. Obviously, the New York Giants went ahead and they have now one of two joint practices with the Detroit Lions down. And right off the top, I want to clear the air here about what ended up being a pretty sluggish return on this first joint practice with Detroit. And obviously, if you are on the negative side of the spectrum, you're going to say, what a disaster. Everything we saw in camp, none of it matters, short of maybe some of the defense versus offense being on the offensive favor. You go, big feather for Daniel Jones in the offense, maybe a concern for the defense. They go to Detroit, and everything just kind of looks sloppy and messy. There's still actually some nice things to take away here. But do you get concerned by that when you hear the first practice with anyone not named a New York Football Giant kind of goes the wrong way?
No, I mean, obviously, would we like to hear that everyone is humming along on
Right.
midseason form? Everything looks great. They completed every pass, made every tackle, caught every touchdown. Of course, you would like that.
Yeah.
But the other side of it is like this is why preseason exists. It's to get rhythm down. It's to get different looks than the ones you've been seeing every day from your own teammates in camp. And
Yep.
that's what Daniel Jones said. It feels more like game form. You get so accustomed to the tendencies that your own defense or offense or whatever plays against you in practice that these are just good reps for them to get to see
Yeah.
different looks, to know that they need to react or get the ball out faster, etc. But make no mistake, Dan Duggan of The Athletic came out and he said, this was far and away the worst that the Giants have looked. And he said, I'm not saying that like for hyperbole. It's more of an indication of how good they've looked so far in training
Right.
camp
Right.
than necessarily anything else. And so, yeah, for me, I'm. It's one day, it's one camp. Everyone's getting their feet underneath him. Things you have the wrong breakfast in the morning. Not the end of the world. I'm sure the sky is falling for you, though, right?
Nice try, guy. No, I'm not concerned with it. And I think to your point, remember too, like we know it's been years now where the practices, it's non-padded. They only got a couple of those in as well. Like you are still building towards it. And fundamentally, like we heard Brian Dable talk about this when they were asking about, well, you use this player here or player X got starting reps. What does that mean? He goes, yeah, just trying different things, And they didn't indicate who was asking the question. It may have been Jordan Renan who was saying last year, you intentionally put obstacles in front of Daniel Jones and intentionally tried to make things easier for Tyrod Taylor. Are you doing that again? Whatever. And guess what? Brian Dable had nothing really to say to it other than, hey, going out trying to get good reps. Because remember, last year, they didn't really fully tell you about that until after the fact, like what they were trying to accomplish with Daniel Jones. So you wouldn't expect anything different. If we hone it, go ahead. Yeah. And then I want to hone it
Yeah.
on a couple of players from this practice that I do want to hit on.
The thing that I was going to say is overall, people, the team struggling or not looking great against an opponent in a preseason thing doesn't matter. What's most important to me is if there's something that is trending in a negative direction and it
Mm,
continues to trend in a negative direction, that's just another concerning factor. If it's like someone played really good and they have an off day, it's fine. If you continually see that someone's making mistakes or someone's not ready or someone's not prepared, it's just it is cumulative, Adam, in terms of like just
mhm.
adding up to where my concern level slowly starts to get, greater and greater individually.
And that's where I think I wanted to go with this, because if we're talking about footsteps in the sand that we'll look back at and say, "Oh, this is how we got to this point," I think you would look in the secondary and say, from a depth perspective, where is the value going to be? Now, this actually, just I'm going to shout out because this is the tweet that I pulled it from, and that's Justin Pennick from Talking Giants. So, he gave a nice little summary here, and you read this in a lot of different spots, but I'm referencing exactly the way he put it. So, St. Brown over Banks on a go ball, but Banks went stride for stride. And this is the thing that you and I talked about last week when it came to him and where has Banks been struggling. I mean, he's had a difficult camp so far, but at the point of release, and it's funny because in contrast to Trey Hawkins, who because he's bigger and more physical, seems to be doing an excellent job at the line. This is the thing where, again, I'm fine with Deonte Banks needing time to develop that at the line of scrimmage skill set because it's going to be more valuable for him as he's a speedier guy and he's not as big. But these are the footsteps in the sand that if we get to week 1 of the NFL season and we see that a lot of guys are getting separation and getting on those outside routes over Banks because he's struggling to jam them at the line of scrimmage, this is how we got here, right? That this is the area of concern for him, and he needs to find a way to solve that problem, because then everything else, the speed, the hip quickness, all the things we saw from him coming out of college, it all adds up. It's just making sure that you stymie and make it difficult and disrupt the timing of wide receivers on their offensive routes.
Yeah, you mentioned Banks. We talked about in some of the training camp. Obviously, he went one on one with Darren Waller. It didn't look
Yeah.
good in that one because he didn't get the jam at the line. Darren Waller had his way on which direction he wanted to go. Made it look like a veteran against a rookie, literally. In that, and so when you start seeing that against other teams, against St. Brown, that same thing, like his athleticism will help him catch up later on and maybe make up for some of the mistakes that happen. But we really need to see some of that technique early on, pre-snap reads, understanding exactly where you want this player to kind of go to. I think if
Mhm.
we see a little bit more of that, I'd like to see that from Banks specifically. The other place that I think is important to take a look at is that right tackle position. I think we're really
Yeah.
starting to understand that even though Evan Neal struggled, he is critical to the success of the New York Giants this season in what they want to do. Not having him out there for practice, still in the concussion protocol. They said Matt Pert and Phillips and others were beat consistently by Aiden Hutchinson. And you may
Yeah.
say, well, that's like a number one pick in the draft, Andy. Like, we're not going to be seeing those types of players every single week in the NFL. And what I
Mm.
would say is actually in the NFC East, you are going to see that every week. You have
Yeah.
guys like Micah Parsons, you have guys like Chase Young, Josh Sweat, Brandon Graham, like you name it. You have guys that have multiple 10-sack seasons that you're going to be going up against each and every time. It shows how we need this depth to get better. It's not good enough with someone like Matt Pert. He's not even ready to be a swing tackle in the NFL, let alone a
Right.
starter. And it really stresses the importance of why we need Evan Neal to be out there healthy and just be at least be playing better than a replacement level right tackle.
Yeah, I think so. And we know there's still going to be growing pains for Evan Neal as he comes into year number 2. But your point is correct. And by the way, it's true for most NFL teams, right? Like now, a lot of teams probably have the swing tackle where they feel confident in who's going to be there. And we still have an entire month, right, for someone to maybe claim that spot. It's hard to look at Matt Pert and think that just because he's struggled to find a foothold anywhere on this line since being drafted. But if you take away Evan Neal, even if he's going to struggle at times, you still expect that the winning reps to be far higher and far more consistent than the losing ones. So, yeah, how he comes out of concussion protocol, again, the consistency, familiarity, right? Figuring out how the offensive line is going to function together. And you're there with Glowinski. So you feel like you're going to get, again, that's more consistent reps. But remember, Glowinski now has a second-year player in Evan Neal on his right and a rookie, we assume, in Schmitz that's going to be starting at center. And we've talked about this before, right? The inconsistency of a young player or a player that's still growing can end up messing with a veteran who's saying, I need to check my box and not look over my shoulder for you. So we keep an eye on that, certainly. Close it out before we turn our attention over to some depth chart information.
No, I was just going to say you talked about Glowinski being there. Just as an example, Ben Bredesen was playing right guard today, say, in
Yeah.
a lot of the different sessions. The Giants are switching it up. They're trying to make sure that they have all the pieces of what the offensive line is going to look like. But we're starting to get our slow, unofficial, early understanding of a few different battles at the depth chart, specifically in the wide receiver group.
Yeah, you talk about this was from Dan Duggan as well. Surprised to hear Joe Schoen say that Wan'Dale Robinson will be back in a week or so. Based on the timing of the injury surgery and what happened and what he's been doing on the side, it seems like starting the season on PUP was certainly a possibility. Now, lumped in with that, when we talk about the depth chart, it's that we had Darius Slayton, we had Paris Campbell, and we had Isaiah Hodgins listed as the top 3 guys on this initial depth chart. And we'll get even into more detail on it. Does it surprise you at all the way it's breaking down? Because for me, it's rookie Jalen Hyatt. You got to earn it. Sterling Shepard, veteran who's coming off injury. Like, it's not hard to get to this point here when you look at who's been there and where the experience level is.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really see another way that the Giants would have done it. Like Jalen Hyatt is a rookie and he needs to earn his spot. Isaiah Hodgins has done nothing but show flashes of being a very solid wide receiver for the Giants in his limited time. They signed Paris Campbell specifically early on in free agency to fill a void, and they re-signed Darius Slayton, who was a starter previously. Like,
Yeah.
so for me, I think that's makes the most sense in the world to have those three, knowing that Wan'Dale isn't healthy yet, knowing that Shepard is still coming back from his injury, as you mentioned. What's actually interesting to me is that when you look at the unofficial depth chart, it's not who is ranked as the ones, it's who is ranked as the twos for the wide receivers, which is Jalen Hyatt, Sterling Shepard, and Cole Beasley was ranked right
Right.
behind
Yeah.
Paris Campbell playing with the twos. And so, Adam, for me, that's fascinating. A guy that was just signed off the street moments ago is ahead of guys like Jamison Crowder, Colin Johnson, Khalil Pimpleton, like all the different guys that you have talked about, even David Sills. You're talking about a guy that just came in and is already potentially solidifying himself with the opportunity for a roster spot. Are you reading it that far into it, or are you just saying this is, giving a veteran his due?
No, I mean, remember, like, so experience from Buffalo, so there's some familiarity there. You're putting a little bit of like a safety net, I think, in front of it. I keep coming back to this, like, and I know when they signed him, and I'm not knocking that they brought in Cole Beasley. He has familiarity. He's what though, 34 years old. Like, if it's me, when I look at it, and to your point about having Cole Beasley behind Paris Campbell, now Jalen Hyatt's there though, and what the skill set's going to look like and where you can utilize him. I think he's versatile in terms of where you line him up. Though we want to see him continue to confirm that the route combinations and growth are going to be there. You flip it over. Like, I don't look at with Darius Slayton and then Sterling Shepard is listed there. Well, remember, even a guy like you mentioned in Jamison Crowder, he also had to come off the injury list too here in camp. So I look at this more. If we go back to Wan'Dale Robinson and him coming into camp, I think Cole Beasley was brought in as the just in case around Sterling Shepard, around Wan'Dale Robinson. For every day and every practice and every week that goes by that Sterling Shepard and Wan'Dale Robinson get out there, look healthy, and show that they can play, it's another day that I think Cole Beasley just keeps shifting down the list here. And I ultimately don't even know if he makes it out of camp with his team. And that's not even, I'm not knocking him. It doesn't line up to me progressively about where this team is trying to go at the wide receiver spot.
It's funny, specifically in wide receiver. The more they get healthy, the more that complicates things for Joe Schoen and Mike Kafka and Brian
Yeah.
Daboll in terms of
Yeah.
like who we keep, who we don't, who can be released, who can sneak onto the practice squad. When we shift over to the defensive side of the depth chart, Adam, one
Yes.
question that I had for you, and you can take this, you can give me as long of an answer or as succinct of an answer as possible. Unofficial depth chart, cornerback position, nickel cornerback is listed as Darnay Holmes as the starter over Cordell Flott.
Yeah.
Initial reaction is like, are they doing it because Darnay Holmes has been here longer? Are they doing it because they're hoping that Darnay can show something? Or like, what's your take on this? Because I was very surprised when I saw that.
I think, see, and here I'll go again with it. And he got beat up in the joint practice as well, going up against, I can't remember who he went up against there, but and everybody did, by the way, lost that same kind of battle that there was being noted coming out of there. Again, if it's me, I look at this the same way that we talk about Bredesen being at the starting center position for Schmitz to overtake him. I know that Cordell Flott is in year number 2, and he's had some of inconsistencies over the course of camp as well. This just feels like you're putting a roadblock in front of a guy that you want to be successful. Khalif Raymond, by the way, was the wide
Yes.
receiver that Darnay Holmes was going up against. I just think you're putting a roadblock in front of Cordell Flott. Dan Duggan and others in the media have talked about how, like, Darnay Holmes has not played well in camp so far, and he hasn't played well for the Giants overall. And there's this world where he doesn't make the roster coming out of camp potentially because of, as you noted, going back months now, there was like over 1.2-ish million or maybe more than that the Giants can save in cap relief, which could matter going into the season. So like there's all of these things at play here. I don't hate the idea that the Giants are saying, Darnay Holmes, feel free to show us that you deserve to remain on this roster. Also, if you show us that you don't deserve to be here, it makes it even easier to justify getting that cap relief, knowing that the cornerback room is certainly in flux right now.
Cutting Darnay Holmes saves the Giants $2.7
2.7.
million
Yes, I
against
want
the
to say
cap.
1.7, but I thought I was off there. Yeah, exactly.
He's only got 190K of dead cap, like guaranteed cash
Yeah.
involved in that. And so when you're thinking about like where could 3 million be spent, if he's getting pushed all the way down underneath a Zion Gilbert, underneath a Rodarius Williams, like I've mentioned before, like if he starts moving down the list, $2.7 million for a backup or a third string cornerback starts to look not fiscally responsible for Joe Schoen. And guess what? There's probably other places that you could put about $3 million to improve this team significantly, if not going out and getting a veteran cornerback for about the same price.
Right. And again, the price point on a struggling cornerback, right? A
Right.
struggling nickel cornerback. Like, it's not like, hey, for 2.7 million, baby, like we're getting some real value here. No, this is a guy that's had some inconsistencies. And I went and watched, man. I got to remind myself, someone sent me a link. They did a great interview with Darnay Holmes. It was actually fascinating to listen to, which always makes it harder for me not to root for guys or to be objective when it comes to who should or shouldn't make the roster. I'll circle back up on that later this week because I think everyone should check it out. Now, on the defensive side, just on that note about where could you spend other money, another spot that my eye went to here was looking at the middle linebacker and will linebacker spot, where we're really excited that Darian Beavers has claimed it. Healthy, it's your spot with Okereke. We really love putting those two guys together here. Micah McFadden, who we talked about last episode, he's feeling more comfortable in the system, right? Second year, playing more instinctually, not trying to learn and then run the system that Wink Martindale wants. I'll tell you what, man. Carter Coughlin, excuse you. He's showing up behind Okereke. Like, are you surprised that the guy who last year is a specials teamer and doesn't really necessarily have a lot of value inside the linebacking core? I would love nothing more than the guy who this now makes in recent memory. I know I got Darian Beavers and I got Carter Coughlin. Those are like the two guys that I called for in the draft, and the Giants actually went and picked up late round picks that I always like to do. Does this indicate anything to you? Same question, right? You know that you have Brown there, Troy, and also Cam. There's just guys in the mix there, but maybe this is the missing area that the Giants do want to try to address before they ultimately get to week one.
I think it kind of speaks more to what the Giants were working with at middle linebacker last season. The fact that guys like Landon Collins is still unsigned, Jalen Smith, who was there for a while, is still unsigned. There's a lot of guys that have participated at the linebacker position for the Giants that are still not signed by any other team right now. And so the
Right,
Giants
but
made
Carter
their
Coughlin was behind those guys last year, and now he's on.
well
You're
because
just like
who
making
else
your
is
point.
there?
It's even worse, isn't it?
Well, they went out and they consolidated a lot of
Yeah.
these different players into Bobby Okereke, right? Like
Right. Right.
that was the move that they made, which ultimately brought Carter Coughlin up the list. So I'm not going to necessarily
Right.
overreact to it. They're like, let's get rid of 4 like veteran mediocre linebackers. Let's get like a top 20 linebacker and then put him behind him. Like, are we a better off team in that regard?
And by the way, because we talk about Cam Brown, who really started to carve out a role for himself on special teams, what I think is excellent, right? Because he has some of that length and maybe he can continue to develop. I will say on the positive side of it, while you can look at the linebacking core and say we could still use some more depth, the reality of a healthy Darian Beavers, now Micah McFadden, he slides down a little bit, right? Because he was getting way more reps maybe than they wanted to last year as a rookie. Now he's in that little bit of a sub role and you can spread him around. Who knows how much Carter Coughlin, even listed as the number one backup, is going to see the field, right? Like we don't know what that's going to look like. So it's interesting early here in camp to look at this depth chart and say, okay, I'll keep my eyes on these to see how they flesh out and what the Giants as an organization choose to do.
One other piece of the depth chart, which I find interesting, that every time I stare at it, I'm thinking something. I'm just trying to make sense of it.
Okay.
Is O'Shane Ximenez is still sitting there as a backup defensive end edge rusher who
I
really
love it.
just but he has not really shown the flashes that you need in order to complement someone like Azeez Ojulari and Kayvon Thibodeau to be able to be that situational pass rusher. I think that there's a world, and I'm just going to say it now, that I think that there's a prediction that I do think Darnay Holmes is on very thin ice on this roster. And I do
Mhm.
think that there's going to be an opportunity for the Giants with that $3 million to look to upgrade that situational pass rusher. I see people talking about JPP as someone that could come back at the veteran minimum to be able to
Yeah.
kind of just be in the rotation, third down guy, pass rusher. But honestly, knowing that Thibodeau has been hurt before, Azeez Ojulari has been hurt before, we need something else at that position that we feel confident can get to the pass rusher. Don't be surprised if they convert Darnay Holmes' non-guaranteed, cap hit over to
Mhm.
edge rushing help at some point.
Well, and also too, because by the way, I think about a day ago, the Giants had brought in Chris Wormley for a visit, right? The 6'5", 300-pounder. And it's just something I wanted to know because he was a third-round pick with the Ravens, but they're bringing in guys. And I think, look at it collectively. I agree with you, right? Take away Darnay Holmes. Ocean Ximenez, and somebody asked this question the other day. If there's one player that you wish was still on the roster under Wink Martindale that was here previous to the turnover for the coaching staff, and it was like, boom, instantly, Lorenzo Carter, right? Like, because it just feels like he was the little more athletic, showed a little more upside than Ocean Ximenez had early in his career. But Ocean Ximenez being that room, I'm fine with it, right? Being one of those bodies. It's not like the one-to-one of Darnay Holmes where you're like, well, Ocean has flashed at times. He's given you some moments. Darnay Holmes, for the most part, has struggled. But when you bring a guy like Wormley, it's just a good reminder the Giants are fluid on defense. So the way they want to comprise their fronts, how they want to rotate through these bodies can actually dictate like how much depth you need in your linebacking core if you actually might beef up the defensive front and get a little bit thicker for stretches, whether it's alongside of a Dexter Lawrence or looking on the outside too, right? So I'm curious. Just to your point, to put a bow on this, my bottom line is like the Giants are still tweaking things here. Like there's going to be 2 or 3 spots on this roster that are going to look different a week, 2 weeks from now.
Yeah, given any moment, there's about 7 guys on defense that you're like, yeah, they'll be on the field, barring any changes, considering they're healthy. There's
Right.
a good 3 spots, maybe even 4, that situationally, depending on what Wink wants to do we want more speed? Do we need more bulk? Like, there are,
Yeah.
safeties, cornerbacks, linebackers, edge rushers that you can kind of interchange, throw in there, and that's kind of the way that Wink Martindale wants it.
And I love that too, by the way, because it is like as camp unfolds, Wink Martindale or Mike Kafka or Brian Dale are going to say, you know what we could use, right? Like, where we're actually feeling a little weak here. We've actually gotten stronger here. And you can kind of start to tell Joe Schoen up the chain of command, like, actually, if I'm giving you my hierarchy board, why don't we put a little more attention here? Let's close out on this idea of core expectations, right? So you're coming off this first practice. It doesn't look particularly great, and that's okay. We're more than happy to kind of just put that by the wayside and not get bogged down in it. However, another one came out here going back a couple of days now from Warren Sharp. He put out best wide receiving cores, which includes tight ends in 2023. And I'm going to run off this list real fast for you. Eagles, Bengals, 49ers, Seahawks, Dolphins, Vikings, Raiders, Bills, Jaguars, Chargers, Ravens, Jets, Bucks, Cowboys, Steelers, Browns, Broncos, Chiefs, Saints, Bears, Commanders. That was 21. All the way up to 21, and the New York Football Giants are not being listed through there. I'll give you officially where they rank. But does this fall into the category of you of like, where are your expectations? Because when we look at it on paper, we were getting excited about Darren Waller and what it could look like, and Hodgins and Slayton and Hyatt and everything, right? But by some benchmarks here, it looks like they're at least going with like, well, you can go ahead and prove that first, right? You can prove that before we even associate you with being a part of this group.
I have no problem with the
Here we go.
expectations that are being put on this pass catching weapon ranking that they've put out here. When you think about it, Isaiah Hodgins was claimed midseason. Wan'Dale Robinson is coming off a knee injury. Sterling Shepard is coming off a season ending injury. Darius Slayton almost got released before the beginning of the season. Jalen Hyatt is a rookie, right? Like, uh, Paris Campbell has been off injured and had a
Sure.
resurgent year last year to be able to help. Cole Beasley was on the street until yesterday.
Yeah.
Jamison Crowder has been a veteran, good guy in the locker room. Colin Johnson coming off an injury. Darren Waller, bunch of years in a row where he has been injured, hasn't been able to stay on the field. When you put all this together, like, there's no question that the Giants should be ranked far down the list. Like, there's no reason why the Giants should be in the top 15 or 18 of these teams that have guys that are first round draft picks, Pro Bowlers, all of those different things combined.
But should they be 30th? Because that's where they're ranked by Ryan. Oh, excuse me. Make sure I give credit where it's due. Ryan McChrystal provided this here over on sharpfootballanalysis.com. When we talk about it, so he does label it out, and I think you make that point there. The Giants pass catching unit is a mess, is how he says it here, and placed in the bottom 6 on every ballot. The biggest mystery is what Brian Daboll and Kafka are going to do with these receivers. Paris Campbell, Sterling Shepard, Jamison Crowder, Jalen Hyatt, and Wan'Dale Robinson are all best suited for roles in the slot. On a positive note, at least there's considerable depth and perhaps someone emerges as a legitimate weapon for Jones. Now, what I find weird about it is they don't make mention of Darren Waller. Now, I think that you're right, and every Giants fan knows this. You only have to go down the list, and you have far more players that you would say injury concern than you don't, right? Darren Waller, Sterling Shepard, Wan'Dale Robinson. You can even add Paris Campbell into that, who's had some injuries his own, right? So now you're talking about a rookie in Jalen Hyatt, Isaiah Hodgins, Darius Slayton. Now, Darius Slayton had some of his own inconsistencies, and this is why maybe Isaiah Hodgins should be regarded very highly because he shows up, plays ball, and makes plays. So I get why it falls into that category. And in that vein, we talk about core expectation, like, and I want to make one note about Wan'Dale here, but I do think that like this has been such a positive offseason, and you do have to acknowledge that everyone staying healthy means this can be very dynamic. One guy, which isn't at the realm of possibility, getting hurt could shake things up a little bit. Couple guys getting hurt, all that, like, this core starts to crumble pretty quickly, and it's the nature of the NFL. But the Giants are probably uniquely positioned with the highest volume of guys that have real injury concerns on their docket coming into this season.
But the way that the Giants are structured is like one won't
I'll
completely
throw
take
another one
out
at
their
you. Yeah, I got
production.
another
Like,
guy I'll throw at you.
like, okay, Wan'Dale can't perform. Sterling Shepard come on board. Like, oh, Sterling Shepard's not here. Jamison Crowder. Like, Jamison Crowder doesn't have anything left. Cole Beasley come on down. Like, it's not like you have a high-end guy where that one guy is gone and your whole season is ruined. I mean, look, I think 30th is probably where they should be ranked. If you have the rankings in front of you, there's
Yeah.
only 2 teams that come into my mind where I would say unequivocally they have worse weapons
Okay.
than the Giants. And my guess is it's the Houston Texans and the Carolina Panthers would be off the top of my head the 2 where I'm like, there's no way that either of them can be ranked in front of the Giants.
By the way, the Houston Texans are 31st. And a big note here, which I wasn't planning on doing, Carolina is dead last. However, you know who their number 1 stud receiver is going to be. One Jonathan Mingo that good Lord, went to bat as hard and heavy as you possibly could. And I wish for the life of me that we were talking about Jonathan Mingo in this mix. But to your point, that they are bereft of talent, both of those rosters. And even when you look up ahead of them, it is the Indianapolis Colts, who have Alec Pierce, who have Jelani Woods. Like, there are some names that give you sample size here. And then you just think about injuries or not when it comes to it. The Patriots are ahead of them. It's hard to say that the Packers, who are 27th, shouldn't be up there when you think about what Christian Watson was. The big question for me, and I'll even label this at the end of the day, is what are we talking about here from a pundit standpoint? Is it about the receivers and the players themselves and their skill set? Is it about the injury history and how successful and healthy you think they're going to be? Or is it, again, right back to the core that from a high level NFL narrative, Daniel Jones is still not looked at as being a consistent top half quarterback or near it in this league. And therefore, you start to mark off those boxes again against them. Because we've talked about other teams, including Justin Fields, who seems to be getting more recognition, right? There's other quarterbacks that haven't accomplished as much or haven't accomplished more than Daniel Jones that still seem to be getting labeled as being more optimistic going into this year than Jones does.
Yeah, I think there is a negative connotation. At the end of the day, you look at something like the Las Vegas Raiders, they've got Devontae Adams, who's arguably first, second, or third, one of the best wide receivers in the league. Then you're talking about Hunter Renfrow and Jacoby Myers and Austin Hooper, guys that have moved around. Like, outside of Devontae Adams, you'd feel pretty good at putting some of the Giants' weapons up against them. But when they're that top heavy, a lot of these other teams have that first round draft pick, that Pro Bowler, that guy that's caught, 1,200, 1,300 yards. The Giants don't have that. But what it tells you is it's going to be by committee this entire season for the Giants to get any production out of their wide receiver core.
Last note that I just wanted to make here, and because I did want to close out on, was on Wan'Dale Robinson. If he is healthy, one thing that I was thinking about in camp is the way they've talked about Saquon Barkley and being out in pass catching situations a lot, and maybe that's like a big gravitational push. Heard Dable talk positively about Gray and what his role can be. Don't forget, in those brief moments when Wan'Dale Robinson was healthy, he lined up in the backfield as well. And I think that dynamic is the way, say everyone is healthy, right? Then you can start to really make sure you maximize the value by putting a guy like Wan'Dale in the backfield. Maybe I could see Jalen Hyatt getting used in that sense. Maybe like a Paris Campbell. All those guys can get shuffled around through there and used in multiple areas, which opens up a traditional slot position for player X or Y as you're working through this. So for me, it's just about, let's keep doing the reps here. Let's get to joint practice number 2, and let's just see how things flesh out. Ultimately, all you can do is hoe your own land, grow your own crops, stay focused on your own process, and not get too concerned about what it looked like when you do these joint practices. Because as a reminder, you're being told to work on certain things. You're not told to care about what the other team is working on against you. And that can create a little bit of a different, vibe coming out of a practice.
Yeah, sometimes they may say, force that ball in there. Try to throw it to that guy. That
I
guy needs
want this
reps. Get it
receiver
in
to go
that
get it.
window.
Yeah. Jones,
go see if
waste
he
the
can go
ball
get
here.
it.
Yeah.
One-on-one challenges, it's fine.
Yep.
Adam, where can the listeners get One Giant Podcast?
Buddy, you get us on YouTube at One Giant Podcast. You get us on Twitter at One Giant Podcast. You follow Andy Mack at Andy Mack 214, me at Adam Armbrecht on all of the great podcast platforms, and soon to be on TikTok, by the way. That's going to be exciting. So you check us out all those great places. And until next time, which will be wrapping up joint session number 2 with Detroit, and then looking ahead to Friday and some of the key players we're going to enjoy in preseason game number 1 for Big Blue. You do all those great things. And until next time, as Andrew Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.